This guide is going to teach you how to pull in Honkai Star Rail if you're trying to develop your account strength in the long term, aka meta-proofing. Eventually you'll have an account that will allow you to pull freely while being completely ready for any task or trial thrown at you by Hoyo. The earlier you develop your core teams, the better, and so that's what we're really going to be talking about. Also, if you're a whale, spender, or simply dedicated waifu/husbando enthusiast, this tip, it might not be perfectly helpful for you, but maybe you can learn something about some team synergies or how to think about new characters that are coming out. We approach combat by team archetypes. These archetypes can range from mono-element teams to a medley of elements that work in sync. Most early game teams will be the latter, where whales or long-term players will experience the boons of the former. Individual characters have a way of expressing themselves in a team environment and can be featured in some of these teams, for example. Dot teams, Counter-Strike teams, follow-up teams, summon teams, hypercarry teams, and possibly in the future we'll see some break teams. Break teams, may or may not exist. We're still on the fence about it, but there will definitely be some units that interact with it. Each of these styles represents an approach to combat. When you're thinking about pulling, especially early on, it's a good idea to have one or two styles in mind that you're going to build towards. There are times when these units can overlap, and this is a huge boon for extra game modes like Simulated Universe or Swarm, giving these multifunctional units that extra spice and that extra value. Even if it's below the norm of the style they dip in, it still is incredibly valuable in these modes. Kafka is an exceptional example of a unit like this. She's a dot-style character first and foremost, but there are team compositions where she can be driven like a hypercarry, or even slot into a follow-up team like Elation in Simulated Universe. When planning the roadmap for an account, it's important to find these kind of unit overlaps so that we can devise the most dynamic teams at a moment's notice. Having a plug-and-play unit or combination of units is incredible in terms of quality of life, as you'll never struggle, and you'll be able to rise to meet any challenge. For a moment, let's discuss some hypothetical characters and how we will get the most out of them. For action advancing / fast-paced units, buffs simply won't cut it, as they will eventually run out over the course of taking so many turns. The solution is to pair these units with a debuffer instead. An excellent and timely example is Jingliu. In the case of Jingliu, this is especially the case because she already buffs herself in many ways. There are diminishing returns on additional buffers that we don't really see on defense reduction units, and Jingliu is an example of where we can really see that. To contrast with Jingliu for a second, Seal's talent effectively gives her a second turn without drain to the buffs she previously had. This is quite unique and allows Seal to get an additional turn with these said buffs. It is important to understand the difference between a turn granted through action advancement and just being granted an additional turn. Let's return to Jingliu. An instance of a team comp being built could be something like Jingliu, Gepard, Silverwolf, and Pela. In this vein, we have created a mono ice team that will demolish units with an ice weakness. You'll notice the inclusion of Silverwolf, a quantum unit, but it's still called a mono ice team. This is the result of Silverwolf's unique ability to implant a weakness. Where units didn't have an ice weakness before, they certainly will now. This widens the range that we can take our mono ice team, where the only counters that will exist are ice resilient units such as ice fragmentum units / bosses or Kukolia, for example. The mention of Silverwolf introduces an idea that we will revisit later when we talk about duo elementing. Now that we've talked about some units and developed a framework for the idea of our dynamic team building, let's start implanting some thoughts. To be a dynamic team builder, one must consider their own units, what benefits they provide, and what they benefit from the most. The easiest word to describe this is synergy. Synergistic units, when paired together, can nearly tackle any problem thrown at them, enhancing each other's abilities very well past their natural limits. In terms of synergies, there are many tiers when it comes to dynamically team building. We can start at the highest tier, where we'll find the idea of universal units, or units that can be plugged and played in pretty much any team composition. Great examples of these units are Luocha, Gepard, and Fujuan. These characters alone have the incredible innate ability to solo sustain an entire team. That is what they provide for the entire team, and their value cannot be understated. The next tier of synergies are synergies that are created when two kits collide in a mutually beneficial way. A good example of this mutually symbiotic relationship can actually be found in Jingliu and Blade. Where Blade is charged up from having his health taken, Jingliu is charged up by taking teammates' health. Their synergy is fantastic, and there are even more synergies to note with these two, but we'll save that for another time, another video likely. Let's now jump into duo element combinations, as it creates its own form of meta and team building. Silverwolf absolutely breaks the game to pieces when it comes to team building and pulling to build team comps, so this section is pretty important. If you have no plans of getting a weakness implanter type of unit, this section may be less helpful, but could still impart some important ideas. The genesis of this type of team lies within how absolutely disgustingly broken Silverwolf and Fu Zhuan are, individually. Silverwolf, with the game-breaking ability to implant a weakness and defense shred, is outstanding for a DPS just by herself. Then we have Fu Zhuan, with her natural ability to soul sustain an entire team by herself. When you pair these two, they pretty much do everything you want in a team except DPS, which at higher Eidolons, they can even achieve that. It's absolutely horrifying what these units can do alone for a team, but together, well, there's just no equal. I see them being as a staple for most of the game's lifespan, only dethroned by what will have to be egregious levels of power creep. When you have these two, you have the luxury of playing most, if not every hypercarry unit. Just tag a supporting character of the same elemental type on the team and you're off to the races. Some examples are Blade with Bronya, Kafka with Serval, Jingyuan with Tingyun, and dare I say, Himiko or Topaz with Asta. These are excellent example combinations that will fulfill the requirement of matching elemental on a carry and a support. With Fu Zhuan and Silverwolf behind the wheel, you can bring any of these duos or other duos that you create to any fight, and you will expect and probably receive excellence. This is not only quality of life, but peace of mind. It does come with potentially one caveat, however. This kind of team building can end up making the game way too easy, so if you enjoy the challenge, this may not be the best route for you. Duo elemental combinations are not limited to Silverwolf and Fu Zhuan, however. We can use any two elements and toss teams together, assuming we're meeting the bare minimum requirements of having a self-sustainer, support or supports, and a damage carry unit. Something like these kind of combinations. We also have to look out a little bit though. While this is a good way to have an account with excellent dynamic duos, we have to be sure that some baseline synergies are also in check. You don't want to be putting a Topaz on a team with no follow-up attacks. I mean, unless you do, of course. I mean, damn, you know. The Quantum Duo does make it universal, but with a little look at the enemies you'll be facing, you can perfectly type match to meet any challenge and then completely exclude this Quantum Duo. That's what duo elementaling is, devising teams out of these duo pieces to tackle specific problems as a result of an enemy being specifically strong against some units or just some kind of elemental typing. Something also important to consider is that duo elementaling may not be something that's easy for newer accounts or players. I would view it as the overarching long-term goal of any account to maximize fun and utility to handle what Hoyo is throwing at us. So now I'm going to show my account and a friend's account for anyone in similar situations, and we're just going to talk through some of our thoughts on where we're going and what we're thinking. My account could have been altered by the RNG that occurred. I got Himiko pretty early, unfortunately, and I could have likely developed stronger teams immediately, but I've kind of neglected what has happened. An idea of one of these teams could have been a Himiko plus Asta, you know, with some other kind of supporting units or defensive units, just so I'd have a team there. Maybe I could have even fully committed to QQ. Instead, I'm balancing my desire for waifus by getting Seal and replacing QQ, and then attempting to meta-proof my account by getting Silverwolf and possible future quantum character. I don't know, maybe a Harmony unit that would fit into this whole debacle. And then that would be my hyper carry team that I can pretty much throw at any problem. As for my second team, I'm going to be rolling with a dot team in Kafka because, I mean, I'm a Kafka simp. I don't know what to tell you. Well, I mean, what can I say? I mean, it's mommy, you know? I'm really looking forward to future dot characters so I can get this guy Sampo off the team And so, well, I mean, you can have an idea of who I'm looking forward to pulling as well. Once these two teams are set, I can start looking forward to creating some duos thanks to Silver Wolf, and that'll be my overarching long-term way of playing. An example is going to be pulling Blade to match up with my Bronya, and then having just that team to dude around with. And this is my friend's account, and he's informed me on where and how he's directing his account. First and foremost, he is also a believer in this Mono Quantum Dream Team of Legends. And secondly, he is mostly just waiting for the right hunt/destruction unit to really settle down on his second team. He has 2 Soul Sustain units already, and with a little more finesse, functional DPS units. So the game for him has already been beaten. And yeah, once he secures that better destruction or hunt unit, that he's completely open to waifu meta, or whatever new 5-star that will offer him more elemental duos that will expand his coverage until he has every element basically covered. Wrapping everything all together, how does all this information influence the way we pull? What I'm trying to impress on people watching or listening is that it's incredibly important to not just pull on a whim if you want to develop a meta-proof account. There are a couple ways we can approach this. We can approach it from the direction of, I want to play this combat archetype, or anything for my beloved. If we approach from the first perspective, aiming for a combat type, we have to educate ourselves on what units are out there and then decide how to execute that style. For instance, if you want to make a dot team, you're going to want Kafka likely a million times over, okay? She is the dot queen and likely will be for a very long time due to her interaction with dots. Who would have thought triggering them is real good? So we'll want to keep an eye out for any units that may place dots more efficiently than a character like Sampo, for example. And then we'll even want to look out for units that are potentially really good at creating dots through breaking, like Luca. Or possibly, we're going to be on the lookout for characters that create unique dots to trigger. Of these two methods, the anything for my beloved method is much easier. Find a unit that you will sim for and commit to them for a while, and there it is. For me, this is also Kafka, and so I'll be making sure she has everything she needs until I'm satisfied. And you may be wondering, well, what about my second team? Where does Mono Quantum team that I desire fall under? Well, it falls under the desire to play a hyper carry team comp. But my issue is that many of those teams, many of those characters, ebb and flow as new characters are released. You know, eventually some characters get power crept and inch out other characters, and I think that's pretty lame. But Silver Wolf creates a much more permanent fixture for Seal by being so goddamn broken. And that's kind of how I've reasoned that out. Otherwise, I'd just be running like a Daniel team because of the damage output for the hyper carry. But the fact that Mono Quantum and the ability to implant a weakness, having a solo sustainer dedicated, and just guaranteeing the quantum weakness so that Seal is basically always hyper effective. You can't beat anything like that. The only thing that could replace Seal is, for me, in that team would be just someone that is also quantum and some kind of carry unit that is even more desirable than Seal. And that's going to be hard to replace, so Seal is a pretty good pickup for me. I want to call out at least one unit per combat archetype that I've previously mentioned to give players a little springboard into who to look out for along their journey. For dot teams, I recommend keeping an eye out for Kafka. For Counter-Strike teams, look out for Clara. For summoning teams, look out for Jingyuan or Topaz, who will appear in a few weeks from when this video is released. Follow-up teams are a little tricky because they're very similar to summon teams. So again, look out for Jingyuan or Topaz or even Clara. They're a little bit more loose in their interpretation. For hypercarry teams, look out for Dan Heng and Biber Lune, who is currently the strongest DPS in the game. And as for break teams, I'm not going to be including them right now because they're not really ready yet. There's nothing to really cook in terms of break teams at the moment. But as soon as there is, you know, I will absolutely be making a video about it to help cover this archetype and explain to players how it can be useful. So make sure you hit the subscribe button below. Thank you. Before I wrap things up, I want to quickly call out some common resources that I use in order to make the best possible decisions. And mind you, these resources will be listed down in the description, so take a look there. When it comes to tier listing, I think Pride1 GG has a pretty good read on units. They also provide a substantial amount of information on each unit and some teams that they can be seen on, and it's an excellent place to get started with. If I'm looking for slightly more in-depth information, I use hsr.kachingmains.com. For more specific guides, they're just a little bit more tailored towards like the theory crafting realm. Not essential by any means, but very useful nonetheless if you really want to master a specific character. When I'm making these videos, my resources do not stop there. I attempt to find other resources using Reddit, friends, Chinese videos, and even other content creators to ensure that my information is as strong as I can make it. This is the minimum I can do to be proud of the efforts I am putting in to creating useful content for players. So if you think it's worth it, hey, leave a like. That's really cool. Thank you. I appreciate it. And leave a comment down below what your favorite character is. Or if you're waiting for them to come out still, let me know which one you're looking forward to the most. Now, I think this video is going to be running a bit long here, but I absolutely have to remind players of the 3 tenets of pulling for free-to-play specifically or low spenders. 1. Never pull 4 stars. They are not guaranteed, but they are guaranteed to make you sad. 2. Never pull for Eidolons. The exception to this is found when you already have 2 teams that are good to go, but this is the route you take when you want a lot less characters to play with, which I think is kind of lame because I derive a lot of fun from having a lot of characters I can play with that have different, unique, cool synergies. So yeah. 3. Never pull for Lycones. And of course this has the exact same exception as the rule above, so do with that information what you will. The entire goal of this video is to find a compromise between pulling for meta but also finding a way to enjoy yourself. I also intend to empower players with a framework to help them stay on the path of meta-proofing their account. And you may be wondering why meta-proof, and the simple answer to that is because we hate fun. And this is the only way to do things, and it has to be our way, and no other way. And the fact that people play games other than the way we do is completely inconceivable, incomprehensible, and outright disgusting. So, thank you and good day.